Well, welcome again, everybody, to day 2 of Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm Bob Hales. You're stuck with me as moderator. Don't forget, the Wall Street Journal is our main sponsor. Today, they have a workshop at the noon Central time slot, 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 Mountain, and 10 Pacific. Be nice if you dropped in at least for a bit. Hey, also don't forget, we're recording our sessions. At the end of the conference, we'll total over 700 session recordings that are available to you all on a host of topics. You'd be amazed, and they're all good. Our session right now is Show Students You're There, Communication, Instructor Presence, and Community Development. And I love it when online students really start to feel they're part of one big community. And I go way back before the internet, but we did televised courses, and the instructor did a great job of bringing everybody together from like 6 different locations. During one break in the class, a student on one side asked out on a date, a student on another side. Now that's building community, isn't it? Anyway, we have with us Dr. Laura Thompson. She has a degree in psychology. Yeah, I have a master's in counseling, and I always said my degree helped me deal with faculty all the time. So you're probably the same way. But has an emphasis on the integration of technology and instruction, and is currently a learning strategies coordinator at Delaware Technical and Community College. So Laura, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone to this session. As Bob said, it shows students you're there. And we're thinking about that communication, instructor presence, and community development in your courses, primarily online, but we'll talk about how they could be even valuable for some of your face-to-face efforts as well. So in our little brief session, we're going to talk about regular and substantive communication, instructor social presence, that community development. Then we'll talk a little bit about a tool of communication plan that you could use to help bring these all together. So let's start off talking about regular and substantive communications, substantive, substantive. This is language that's coming from the federal guidelines for online instruction to help ensure the availability of financial aid for those courses. So we do want to make sure we have regular and substantive communication. And so we'll talk about kind of the schedule of that, the content, and the timeliness. But first, let's talk about what's the difference between regular and substantive communication. Regular communication is that scheduled communication that you have. You're going to send emails every week to your students, or if you have the availability in your learning management system, your LMS. My college uses D2L. Some use Canvas, for instance. You could schedule announcements for the duration of the course, where some special points are, and those are deployed every Monday at 8 in the morning, for instance. We have intelligent agents in D2L as well that we can set up to be deployed based upon parameters. For instance, completion of a quiz, and we could have a different message deployed to students depending upon their achievement in that quiz. Your discussion boards can be a form of that regular communication as well, because you often have discussion boards that are weekly, for instance. But if we want to think about that substantive communication, it needs to be specifically tied to your content. So if you have regular communication with your students that talk about, well, how was your weekend? And where did you go to dinner last night? Those are nice for community building, but those don't count for substantive communication. It really has to be tied to the content of your course. So if they're learning about some science topics with you, or math or psychology, maybe nursing, those conversations really have to be tied into your content. And we talked about those scheduled announcements. Maybe they go out every Monday at 8. One way that you can add some substance again to that is have some messages that are specifically tailored to that cohort of students in front of you. So not just those typical ones that go weekly to give you kind of a summary of the week before and an introduction to the next week coming that can be very similar from course to course. We're thinking about that specificness. So for instance, on a Wednesday, what I've done in my courses is I have a communication through an announcement that I post in my class that talks about how students have responded in their discussion boards. So I might say, hey, Raphael had a particularly insightful post about schizophrenia. You might like to check that out and see if there's anything that needs to be added from his conversation. Then we can think about assignments and assessments. So for your assignments and assessments, that's where we can give that traditional feedback. And that's very substantive, right? We're talking about this is how you achieved on this assignment. This is where your work is. Good job. Here are your strengths. Here's maybe you need to be less vague in this area. But you'll notice that I said feed forward on there as well. And feed forward is a slightly different concept where you're being very specific about actionable feedback. So this is feedback that's intentional to help students' performance improve in their next assignment, in their next assessment, or in the following course. So these are things that they can take and specifically grow and implement to improve their performance. And then we have that responsiveness to students' academic needs. The responsive part also has a time element. So if someone posts in week 1 a question in the discussion board and you respond in week 4, that's not going to be very helpful because chances are slim that they're still checking discussion board 1, right, by then. So there is some time element there, but it's also not that you need to respond within 2 seconds. Our society has been kind of built that way, right? That we think that someone should respond right away. But it's helping to be, when your students are asking questions, you are there to be able to give them some answers. So let's think about your communication strategies. Currently, how do you provide regular and substantive interactions? Even if you haven't really thought about it this way, what are some of the things that you've done that fit into what we're talking about so far? And maybe I've given you some inspiration for something that you might try. Go ahead and feel free to type that in the chat or unmute for a little bit and give us some ideas. I see that we have someone that contributed that they provide detailed assignment feedback, trying to make sure that they're giving that feedback. And I bet you're giving some feed forward in there too. I bet you are. And thank you very much. They said that they like the idea of pointing out specific discussion posts for students to check out. And I see someone who's really responding to timeliness. They give feedback as soon as they can, so it's meaningful to students. Excellent. And use the announcements in their LMS and schedule them so they go at the same time every week. Students can expect them at 8 in the morning, right? Or 10 in the morning, whenever your schedule is. Oh, I love this. Liz says she uses video announcements in her weekly announcements. Liz, you get a gold star because we're going to talk about video too and the use of that. Oh, I see. Even some instructional designers, they're able to kind of help instructors through the requirement of that weekly feedback in online discussions. Excellent. There are a lot of great ways that you're supporting regular and substantive interactions with your students or with your faculty whom you advise. Nice work. Oh, and one more thing. Joy said class-wide feedback on discussion posts to summarize common issues. And that's what's really important. It doesn't have to be targeted to each of your 25 students, or if you're in a big lecture hall, each of your 80. It can be class-wide, or you can respond to some themes that you've seen in those discussion posts or in those discussions. Even in person, you might use your LMS to help support that in-person discussion by having those continued discussions online. All right, let's talk about instructor social presence. At this point, we're trying to think about a definition for that. We're going to talk about students' preference for connections with their instructors, and we'll even talk about the community of inquiry and a possible revision to that. But first, let's start with instructor social presence. Social presence, the conversations about it have been around for a long time. So in 2000, Garrison and colleagues came up with the community of inquiry, specifically based in online communication. But even back as far as into the 60s and further back, when Bob was mentioning, like televised instruction, we've been talking about the social presence. And then when we added a lot of this text-based presence, when we had this internet come up, right, we really needed to figure out how do we feel that presence from each other. Now, the definition of what social presence is, it's still being developed, but a lot of the research shows some common elements. For instance, there's that sense of salience, that sense of being noticeable, of being seen, of existing, really. Because there's also that sense of interacting with a real person. I'm not sure if you've tied into a lot of this conversation recently about Chat GPT, the artificial intelligence chat bots that can help generate lots of writing for you. But it's easy to feel in an online course, especially, that there's kind of a wizard behind the curtain. Maybe there's a robot driving the course. You really have to have that instructor social presence to realize that it's a real person. And some other elements are that sense of belonging and that sense of connection with others. But we'll dive into this conversation a little bit more, thinking about the community of inquiry. In that community of inquiry, there are 3 presences. Those presences combine to have an educational experience when they overlap. One of the presences is teaching presence. Traditionally, we're thinking about that as the teacher side of it, setting up the class, knowing what the curriculum is, facilitating those discussions, all those teacherly duties that you have. The cognitive presence is really processing that content. How are we learning that information? How are we making new ideas? And then the social presence traditionally has been kind of those water cooler conversations. How are we interacting with each other? But there have been some more recent research that's, there have been lots of actually proposals of revisions, but this is one, Armelini and De Stefani, that proposed putting social presence at a more central location in the Venn diagram. So you'll see that there's areas 1, 2, 3, and 6. Those are overlapping in the social presence, which is number 3, that community development. We'll talk more about those in a second. If you look at number 4, that's course design, that's going to be more of that traditional teaching presence. If you think about number 5, that self-study, that's more traditional cognitive presence. And really that's a lot how our students directing their own learning. Then in the middle, we have that social presence, and where it overlaps with teaching presence, we have interactions for learning. So how will we interact? How are we going to have that content? How is it going to be presented in the course? Here's the information, let's talk about it. When we go to number 2, the socialization of content, that's also language driven as well. We're thinking about how are we going to help students learn new information, kind of challenge their current thinking. So we'll ask them what if questions. What if we changed this variable? Or what if this factor was a little bit different? Those combine for the learning experience along with that community development. And community is so important, not only in person, where it's sometimes a little easier, but we have to be very strategic about developing that community in our online courses. And I do see a note that one revision that they've seen has been to add emotional presence. And yeah, that has been a possibility of how people have been trying to interpret kind of that side of it. I see this one with the social presence kind of centrally, incorporating some of those ideas of Vygotsky or some of our other social learning theories, where we learn through apprenticeship or we learn through our interactions with others, really in kind of even a developmental way. So this is another way to be able to look at kind of where that social presence comes. But let's laser in on instructor social presence, because that's the part that we're focusing on today. The instructor needs to be available. We talked about that responsiveness before as well. Part of that responsiveness is that availability. Maybe it's through email, maybe it's through the messaging system in your LMS, maybe it's through Remind, it's an app, or Google Voice. There's lots of different ways. Some instructors poll their students and ask them, which ways would you like me to communicate with you? Some propose maybe 4 ways, and students vote amongst those 4 ways, and then they choose the 2 that work the best for the instructor and for the course. I am not saying you need to have 20 different ways that you communicate with students. Please, please, please focus in on 2 or 3 of those that feel natural for you and are natural for your cohort of students. And that helps build that availability, that sense of availability. Also, when you're giving students some of your personality, and we'll talk about that in that 3rd bullet, you're making yourself seem available as well. That you're someone who will answer questions, who it's okay to ask. Responsiveness, again, that's that timely part that we mentioned before. It's being able to respond to students in a timely fashion that you've communicated to them. So in your introduction at the beginning of your course, you want to be very clear and transparent. And this is part of that communication plan. Here's that tickler for when we're going to talk about that. If you are going to be able to respond within 24 hours, you want to be very transparent about that. If it's 24 to 48 hours, something like that. I'm not saying responsive teachers have to respond in 2 seconds. Again, that's our society, right? We text someone, and if they don't text us right back, we think we're being ghosted or ignored. So it's that opportunity. If you're very clear with students, you can expect me to respond to you within 24 hours. Then that relieves some angst in your students as well. Then we want to think about that personable side, where we're letting out some of our personality. Sometimes we do that with things like Bitmojis. So I have some examples, but other graphics work too. Other pictures work to help students know a little bit more about you. In your introduction, and I loved, for instance, how Liz had mentioned video announcements, you can have a video introduction as well. And that helps students feel like they know you a little bit more. They hear your voice, they see your actions, they hear the pronunciation of your name. Now, mine's pretty easy. I'm Dr. Thompson, right? But there are some names out there that might be just a little bit more difficult. And if they hear you in a video introduction that hopefully you can send to them even before your first day of class, that again alleviates some of that angst and they feel that connection with you. So this Bitmoji, it's supposed to be a little bit funny, it's supposed to be a little bit interesting. We have, is this thing on? Talking about maybe this is an announcement coming through. I'm trying to make sure that they're listening, trying to grab their attention. Those are just some ways that you can incorporate some of your personality, a little bit of a safe sense of humor as well, to help build that connection. Oh, and by the way, I'm not saying in your introduction that you need to give students your entire life story in order to connect with them. A little bit of self-disclosure is good, but you might even go beyond, well, I have 2 dogs, you might even go beyond that, but keep it on the professional side to talk about the experiences you've had as a professional in the field in which they are learning, and to help them realize that maybe you faced some obstacles and you were able to overcome them. So if they face some obstacles, they have that ability as well. And you'll be building their grit and their growth mindset when you do that. If you want to talk about more about grit and growth mindset, contact me. My email's at the end. I'd love to talk to you about it. I really love this quote because this makes me think about that instructor-student relationship. About few delights can equal that mere presence of knowing that someone's there, that we feel like we can trust, and we feel like we can communicate with them. And this is kind of that cornerstone of that community, is feeling like we can trust the people in that community and that we're safe with them. And you as the instructor, this is your job as well. And I know that sometimes that feels like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with it. But really just offering that side of you, that instructor social presence, is a cornerstone to help build the community with the other participants in your course too. So let's think about your presence. How are you strategically available or responsive? How do you communicate your presence to others? Go ahead and please get your hands ready and put some information in the chat, or feel free to unmute to give us some insights. Excellent. I see one response from Megan that many ways, but using audio or video feedback is a great way. And I like that you mentioned audio feedback in there as well. Even just hearing your voice helps kind of soften that feedback. So it doesn't, sometimes students will read what you've written textually and think, oh, I'm so awful, I'm so terrible. But when they can hear your voice or can also see your face, they hear that message as more of one, I care about you. I know that you can accomplish these goals that I have for you, and you have that belief in them. I love that. We've got a responsiveness within 24 hours, and there's a Q&A discussion forms that are sent to an inbox so that Lindsay can know what the issues are. Excellent. Elizabeth says, I let students know that they can hear from me within 48 hours. Oh, I love that. We have a link in the chat to a belonging story video. That sense of belonging is so important. Multiple means of communication, 24 to 48 response time. And Lindsay's using her former experience as an online student to help inform how she is instructing now, or how she gives advice to other instructors. That's fabulous. All right. Let's talk about community development. These are those interactions with the instructor, but they're also interactions between students. To start with, let's think about that community development, and we're going to focus in on instructor interactions with students. Those are the things that you have the most control over, right? And here's good news. Students prefer to interact with you over their students, research has shown. This could be for a few reasons in the online situation, because typically I was an online student as well. I have my own life. I have my own friends. I have things going on for me. I don't have to make friends in this online situation, but I feel like I want to connect with my instructor. There might be a few reasons for that, right? It could be because my instructor is the academic expert in this course and I want to learn so much from them. It could be my instructor is a great network possibility, so I'd like to build a relationship with them. It could also be that just being able to see that you have all of this expertise and what can I learn from you. This can be building those relationships between students and instructors often is easier again, in that online situation, than helping your students build connections with each other. So you really have that opportunity to reach out, or you can maybe talk with students one-to-one in student hours. You have lots of communication going, because we already talked about that regular and substantive communication to help build that sense of community between you and each of your students. And again, as I mentioned, you are the cornerstone of the classroom community. Lots of research shows that if the instructor is not initiating that community, it never happens. So we talked about those water cooler conversations. Some instructors create a water cooler discussion board so students can talk to each other, and they find that no one ever does anything in it, or they respond for maybe a week and then it dies out. Some of the research has shown that part of that is because of students not focusing in on that relationship with each other. Some of it is that lack of cognitive task in there. So they might be invited to ask a question, but if nobody does, there isn't really any cognitive interaction inside there. So you as the instructor could pepper in some questions, or could say, by the way, in this upcoming exam number 2, students have often struggled in this area. What advice or what questions might you have in this area so that we can make sure we address them? So you're kind of helping to spur that interaction, and then you kind of back up and see what they do. Then if we think about community development, it's student interactions with each other. So these can be in your group projects, your discussion boards, or your breakout rooms. And a lot of this sounds like online, but you can even see how some of this can be in person as well, as we're switching to more hybrid courses too, right? But let's focus in on kind of that online idea for a while too. Our group projects. You might have been involved in group projects as well, but we've gotten feedback from students before if they've been involved in group projects. It's not always a positive experience. Quite often we have student A say, I always do all of the work and I can't stand it. And I don't like how everyone just skates by and I have to do everything. You have student C who might say, yeah, I'll let them do all the work. Or it might also be that attitude of, they just ran away with it, so I let them. You're not quite sure exactly the dynamics within there, but one of the ways you can help to influence the dynamics inside a group project is providing some roles within that group. So you might have roles that you either assign or you let the students assign to themselves within the group, but maybe there's a reporter, someone who's making sure that the information is ready to go out. You've got someone who's the researcher who brings the information to the group so that they can kind of discuss it. You might have someone else who is more of like the mediator, where they're making sure that everyone in the group has a say, and that's their job, that they're pulling in those quiet individuals in the group. And it's also thinking strategically about the size of your group. If your groups are running 5 or 6, it's really easy for someone to get lost in the group. In a pair, you can't really get lost. In a triad, it starts to be a little bit tricky. By the time you get to 4 or more, it's sometimes really, again, easy for a student to feel like their voice isn't heard or respected. Again, assigning roles can help alleviate some of that, but just be very strategic in how you're designing those group projects. For discussion boards, if you have a large class of, say, 25 students and everyone is responding to the discussion board prompt in one thread, in one string, then if I am the 25th student to respond, or 40th, whatever size your class is, chances are pretty slim that anyone read my contribution besides you as the instructor, because it was at the end. So one of the things that you can do as well for your discussion boards is you can have the same discussion prompt, but in several small groups. It is more difficult for my voice to be lost if I'm in a group of 5 than if I'm in a group of, if I'm in the whole class of, say, 25 to 30. I will feel more heard. And if I am a student who tends to be a little bit quieter, this gives me the opportunity to express my thoughts and to, again, feel like I'm contributing to the conversation. It also reduces the onus on those students who really like to read the discussion posts and might actually spend time reading all 25 posts when that is such a big time commitment for them. The other idea about discussion boards, if you're an in-person course, it's still nice to have online discussion boards and perhaps in these small groups. But one of the things, I know that you've had these opportunities with your students that you're into a great conversation and then suddenly the time is up or you have to transition to the next part of your lesson. This is a great place to continue those conversations in your LMS. It's a fabulous place to say, hey, we had such a great conversation. Go ahead and go to the discussion board. You as the instructor don't have to grade it. It's really just those students who have a place to communicate, who were also so excited about the topic. But it also gives your students who might be quieter the opportunity to participate as well. So those might be students who have second language needs, for instance, or it might be a student who has a slower processing of what's going on. And it's harder for them to participate in that rapid give and take fire of a live conversation. They have the chance to compose their response and feel very good about the solidity of their response, and maybe even cite some research in there as well. When they hit post, they feel like their contribution is the best that they could contribute. And it still gives you a chance to hear the voices of these quieter students that you might have thought, they don't like to participate. But really, they just need that time to compose what they feel is a valuable contribution. So that's some thoughts about discussion boards. And you'll still hear how in both of these examples, there's student interactions with each other, but I mentioned the instructor all the time because there's such a role. You're the cornerstone, you're the keystone in creating this community. And then finally, there's those breakout rooms. And something to think about when you're doing breakout rooms, whether it's in Zoom or those little breakout groups, inside your in-person, there is something to be said for keeping the groups the same throughout the semester. Hear me out. Some of the thoughts behind this are that smaller group of students get that opportunity to know each other, to communicate with each other, to build that sense of community and trust amongst each other. So consider the appropriateness in your course if it seems like it would work. Now, of course, if you group 5 students and the 5th student is just a pain in that group, or 2 of the students have a huge personality conflict, then of course you can reconsider how you move them around. But there is some value, so consider it and decide if that might be something you'd like to try. So since we're talking about considering things, let's think about your classroom community. How do you initiate and sustain community in your classroom? Have your hands ready to be able to put it into the chat. Be ready. And what types of interactions do you plan? Are you strategic about and intentional to help build that community in your course? Cooperative learning and collaboration. And in that cooperative learning, I think I hear maybe some role in there, Megan. Do I hear that? And group projects, Joyce says. And thank you. I see an admission that this is the hardest one, trying to go past discussion boards to build that community. Oh, and thank you. Yeah, Megan, most likely some roles in there. Wow. Shelley is a class of 50. So she divides her class into 5 groups. And those groups stay together all semester. Oh, look at that, right on that same wavelength. And they use voice discussions. VoiceThread is the tool that they use. In-class group assignments, discussion, and a reporter. So you've got some roles going on, Lisbeth. And we have some synchronous lab meetings most weeks, and that practice is available for small groups. Those are some great ideas of how you're building some community. And hopefully you have some inspiration as well from ideas that you'd like to try to incorporate. All right. Let's think about this communication plan. So I talked to you about a tool. Now for me, I created a table, but not everyone thinks in tables. But I just want us to talk about how we might really think about being intentional in our communication plan, what we can develop in that plan in advance, and how we can be flexibly responsive in the moment as well. So our communication plan that we create, we're focusing in on those faculty interactions because really that's the focus of this session, is showing students that you're there. So that's why I'm focusing in on faculty interactions for this conversation. We talked about emails, announcements, those intelligent agents or discussion boards. But when you're thinking about those faculty interactions that you're planning, really have some of that intentional thought. How does this look in the course? So is it going to be weekly, every Monday at 8 a.m.? Maybe your week actually starts on a Saturday. So is it going to be every Saturday at 8 a.m.? Trying to think about that and consider that. So in my table, I had my conversation, like my email. I had maybe what a sample email looked like. And then I talked about my frequency in my course. And that's the other question, is how frequently does it occur? For my intelligent agents, those are things that I'm responding for their performance on an assignment or an assessment. Again, those emails and announcements are a different kind of communication. And discussion boards, being able to kind of pop up if you need them, that would take that to the substantive side. Those regularly scheduled ones are that regular communication plan. If we move into substantive communication plan, now we want to think about the qualities of this. So we've got our regularly, so as I told you, I have my announcement. And then I said a sample announcement. This is where you're thinking about, how am I relating this to my content? How am I really going to communicate this? I might also think about, well, if a student has this performance on an assignment, I want to give them access to this resource because they did well. This will help challenge them. They showed me that they did really well, so this helps challenge them. They did well, so here's some more information so they can read a little more deeply. They didn't do quite so well, so I want to give them a couple resources that could help strengthen their future performance, things like that. Those might be videos from you that are speaking to them specifically, or that are speaking to general issues that you've seen in the past if you've taught the course a few times. It's really thinking about, what feedback are you offering? Where are you focusing? Are you using some rubrics? Are those rubrics helping to guide your responses to students? And then feed forward, again, was that real intentional provision of actionable feedback, that if they are able to incorporate these ideas that you're giving them, their performance will improve. So it's really having that intentional thinking in there. And again, as I said, I think in tables. So I had it in a word table like this in tables, but you might have an outline. You might have a word web that helps you design that. So kind of thinking about what's the best way that you think, or the best way that you can help advise faculty so that they can develop their regular and substantive communication. So here's another thought. So you can respond textually for regular and substantive communication, and this helps build your community. So you might respond, as we talked about before, with a post directing students to review other specific posts. So I like what you said about using ReadSpeaker in the course to help make sure everyone can access the text on the page. Did you see that Sandra wrote something similar about that? About a different accessibility feature. So now, not only Kadeem was who I wrote that to, now he's more likely to go look at Sandra's response, but other people who are reading Kadeem's post are more likely to go see Sandra's response as well. So I'm also building those connections between students to help with that. I'm also building Kadeem and Sandra's presence in the course because I'm mentioning their name and I am giving some kudos. So those are some nice ways. You can prompt to the group, as we had in our chat, talking about maybe some general feedback. Make sure you have your debate outline created that shares your talking points. That's substantive because I'm talking about our debate outline, but I'm giving them some specific information about it that shares their talking points. Or I'm noticing as a class, you're making good points, but you need some more convincing evidence. A website like this might serve as a good resource. And then I give the class this website resource to help them kind of dive into how do you accomplish this task. Another side of that, though, is with video. So here we have a response to the student post. I kind of mentioned it before on the text side, but this was an example of me recording a video. When you're watching this video, pay close attention to the language that you hear because it's different than the text here. And watch the facial expressions and then be ready to give a little bit of feedback afterwards in the chat about differences that you noticed.
Nadine, I really like what you said about being able to use ReadSpeaker in the classroom. And I also enjoy.
Can you hear that, by the way? Nice. Okay, good. Thank you.
How you pointed out that Read Speaker was valuable not only for students who needed a screen reader, but could also help students who might be multitasking or might want to take notes and listen to the text while they take notes. Did you happen to see that Sandra wrote something about another accessibility feature that was similar to this one? Check it out.
So what similarities, differences did you notice? What might be the different ways that Kadeem receives this response from text versus the video? Oh, yeah, it's more personal. It's more alive. Thanks for that, Liz. I'm glad. Seems more personal. It's more like a conversation. It's a little more inviting. Smiled and giggled. Yeah. And I think it's nice. It's nice to give the students that feedback when you're kind of delighted by what they say too. It's hard to write that. It's hard. I'm so delighted by what you said. But if you say, wow, this is really a neat answer. Those are some ways that those added social cues that are provided through seeing your face. And I just watched, well, this is some insight to you. I actually just had watched a video just last week about how do you gain people's attention in the first 2 minutes of your presentation. Hello. But one of the things that they talked about was how over 80% of communication, actually 90% of communication, is that sound of your voice and your facial features. And over half of it is really being able to add that social cue of your expressions. And it really made me also think, I mean, my research to get my DR, I just walked last April, was about the use of video in instruction to be able to help build that community. So I'm a really huge proponent of this communication. And I really enjoy that. Excellent. I love that Megan just said, you might find that if you do it, you need less notes. And there's research that supports that too, is the time that is spent in making that video, you say, oftentimes people say more, and you take it beyond only saying like the mechanical issues in the writing. Oh, you need better sentence here, you need better that. People tend to focus more on the ideas, the concepts when they're making a video where they're talking about it. I can also make one where I share the screen and talk about it if I have some very specific things that we need to talk about. And if you provide text and video, if you do, then that way it helps work towards how students might really be able to get the most out of what you're saying. They can use it the way that they need to. I love this interaction. I love how you guys are participating. All right. So now let's think about your communication plan. How will you ensure regular communication? What messages will you send? How might you communicate substantively? And what's a sample statement that an instructor could use? So any of those kinds of responses in the chat to give us some idea of how we could help support this. And maybe tell me how you think best. Do you think best in tables? Do you think better in webs, in outlines? I'm just kind of curious about that.
They're slow typists.
I like the idea of doing video feedback on drafts of assignments. Yes, there is a tool called Flip. It used to be Flipgrid, if you've heard of it before, that you can actually use that very well to help track that feedback that you're giving students. If you want to talk more about that, let me know, email me and we'll talk about it. Oh, Shelly is working smart. She's using a template that she fills in different parts for each semester. And she likes to leave voice responses for her students. That added tone of voice, Shelly, is so important for them to feel the warmth in your voice, that you're being supportive when you give them that information. Elena says delayed announcements. Let students know when feedback is coming. What does that mean? I want more information. And she has 5-minute Zoom office hours to check in. Just check in so they don't feel like it's a huge commitment, right? Is that it, Elena? I hope I said your name right. Excellent. Well, if you type some more about that or want to, oh, she said, just ideas that I offer our faculty. And yes, excellent. Okay. Well, and if you, maybe I can reach out to you and get some more information about that too. All right. So I want to kind of summarize what we talked about today. Regular and substantive communication is required for online courses, really for those federal guidelines. This type of communication, though, it enhances that instructor social presence. And when you increase and enhance your instructor social presence, that's the cornerstone of building that community within your course. And the best way to ensure that communication is regular and substantive is by having a communication plan, being very strategic about what you're trying to do and intentional in your efforts. Here's resources. But I want to say thank you. Again, I'm Laura Thompson. Here's my email, Instagram, or I'm sorry, that's Twitter. But here's my email as well if you want to reach out and have more conversations. This was brief, but I really enjoyed your participation. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, it's important to really start out from the very beginning doing the communication and modeling for the students what you expect from them. Otherwise, as it goes on, it gets harder and harder to really change than the mode they've gotten into.
Yeah. Well, and you're right, Bob, that even before the course begins, starting that conversation, starting that introduction, that community building is so important.
Well, I think they liked what you had to share.
Yeah, I enjoyed all of the interactions too.
Well, looks like we've reached closure, Laura. Really, this is very helpful. And I like the way you present. You come across as enthusiastic and engaging, the way an instructor should be, right?
Thank you.
So